Wind energy. First, we start with a little statement about the economics of some of the renewable energy technologies moving to China. For solar panels, the United States was still ahead of China, but likely is not anymore in solar. Here you see a mass emailed plea from the Move On organization, a progressive activist group, warning of the end of American competitiveness in the renewable energy industry and the loss of American jobs. From this year's renewable energy report, it's interesting to note that renewables count for 16% of all energy, but for electricity, renewables count for, again, 16% or more, but mostly it's hydro, which many people don't consider renewable because it is so environmentally damaging. So we look at other renewables, which are wind and solar, and wind is the greater portion of that. So we talk about the growth of the wind industry, but it's still very, very small compared to conventional energy conversion technologies. And so here we see very interesting, again, this from this year's report, the United States lost the lead as far as the most wind energy capacity just this past year, as China nearly doubled its wind capacity with another 20 gigawatts. We see globally an exponential rise in wind energy to the point of 200 gigawatts. And you say, okay, 200 gigawatts, if the world average power is 17 terawatts, and electricity is 1/3 of that for the primary energy, which we convert with a 1/3 efficiency, that's 1/9. So about 1/9 of our total energy of the world, I'm estimating, is going to be on the order of 2 terawatts of generated electricity for the world. And so this is 10% of that. However, that does not mean that 10% of the world's electricity is generated by wind. Why is that? Because this is wind capacity. That means if all the windmills, if they were all spinning and producing electricity at their nameplate capacity, but we don't always get all the wind we want. We have a wind capacity factor that's about the same as solar, which is about 1/3. So you really need to multiply that by 1/3, and that brings us down to about 3%, which again is what the report stated. By the year-end, wind accounted for 2.3% of electricity generation, even if it is 10% of the electrical generation capacity. So we have a wind report by our friend Robert Thresher of National Wind Technology Center at Renewable Energy Laboratory in Boulder, Colorado. And we can see in 2007, this is the amount of deployed wind generation capacity in each state. So for instance, Texas has 4,296 megawatts or 4.3 gigawatts of capacity, somewhat more than California. This is the year after Texas overtook California as the leading wind electricity producing state. This is for 2012, and this is for 2018, 24, and 2030. This is the projected wind capacity of states over the years, and we can see by 2030 we anticipate there will be a lot of offshore wind. This one's a particular one to note because this has come up. This is there now, or is being built right now. This is called Cape Wind, right off the coast of Martha's Vineyard, famous for the controversy between the environmentalists that wanted wind and the environmentalists that opposed it. In particular, Senator Edward Kennedy vehemently opposed it because he has land on Martha's Vineyard and didn't want to have to look at the windmills. More about that later. Projecting the new lines that will need to be built in the next 20 years as well because of the wind facilities, because a lot of these wind farms are not going to be in metropolitan areas, and so the electricity has to be transmitted. So how do windmills work? The blade of a windmill is pushed forward by the very same process that provides lift to the wing of an airplane. The air going over the curved surface of the top experiences a lower pressure and provides lift. The angle of attack is this angle, the angle that the wing rises at, and the lift that is experienced by the wing will grow proportionally with the angle of attack until you get to a critical angle at which the wing stalls. And if you're in a plane, that's bad for you because you lose your lift and you drop like a rock. When we look at these wings going in a circle perpendicular to the wind, we have to include the component of the speed of the wind that the blade experiences because it's moving. So if you're moving in this direction, you feel a wind in the opposite direction. So you have to add this component due to the fact that you're turning to this component due to the fact that the wind's blowing. When you add those two components of the wind speed together, you get a wind velocity in the reference frame of the wing that's in this direction. You get a resultant lift perpendicular to that. So if the wind is in this direction, the wing is pushed this way. And so this is with a larger angle of attack, this is with a lower angle of attack. You can see this one has a greater lift pulling the wing forward or rotating the blade. So if this is a directional lift, we have a component in this direction that turns the blade or provides torque to rotate the windmill. This component of the lift pushes perpendicular on the axes and provides thrust, which is an engineering challenge to deal with because it makes it harder for the blade to turn due to friction. So why do we have 3 blades? Why don't we have 1,000 blades? And we look at the issue of turbulence. This is from the wing of an airplane. And so what they're saying is as this spins, this blade is going to make a turbulence that messes with this blade. And so there's no reason to have more. And additionally, if you added another blade, which would increase your number of blades by 30%, you would increase the cost of making them by 30%, but you would increase the amount of power you got by considerably less than 30%. And because the blades are spinning very quickly, about 5 times faster than the speed of the wind, we can think of these 3 blades as extracting energy from the full circle that they subtend. What is the power in the wind? We know that kinetic energy is 1/2 mv squared, and the energy density is going to be energy divided by the volume. So we get 1/2 rho v squared, where rho is the density of the air in kilograms per meter cubed. So therefore energy is the energy density times volume, and we can express volume as length times the area. What is that? Well, this is the area of the subtended circle of your windmill blades. The length would be the length of an amount of air that's coming into the windmill. We can express power as energy divided by time and make these substitutions. And because we have a length divided by time gives us another velocity, we see that power is proportional to v cubed. We get 2 v's because of the kinetic energy, and we get another v because of how fast that kinetic energy is moving through the blades. And so we can see that the energy density in air goes like velocity cubed, increases very quickly with speed. The density of air is about 1.2 kilograms per meter cubed. So this would yield at 1 meter per second, you'd have about 0.6 watts passing through every meter squared of area. And at 9 meters per second, you'd have about 440 watts per square meter. So let's remember that number because we'll come back to it. Lastly, we can express the area as pi radius squared, where radius is the length of the blade. So we see that the power is proportional to v cubed and r squared. And bigger is better. Why is that? Well, yeah, if you make it bigger, you're going to extract a lot more energy from the wind. And you want to make velocity faster. Well, how do you do that? You make the windmill taller. Yes, over the years, as fast as we can, we are making windmills higher and bigger to the point of 3 megawatts right here. How big is that? Well, this is the size of a 747. And this is an old slide. The newest windmills are now 5 megawatts. Think about that. That's good for 5,000. That's good for 5,000 Americans. And we can see that the offshore windmills are even bigger. Now, why would they be bigger? This is because you don't have to build them over the water as high because the wind moves more quickly at lower levels. So you can see here is a windmill on the ground. It's very high in the air. But when you build them over the water, they're pretty close to the surface. Again, you can imagine the challenge of putting these together. 1/3 of the cost of putting up a windmill is the act of erecting it. When we look at the total area here, we have 12,500 meters squared. And we take the power, if this is 5 megawatts, and we divide it by that area, we get 400 watts per meter squared, consistent with our estimate right here. Wind turbine efficiency has improved over the years, but the efficiency has a maximum. It has a limit of 59%, called the Betz limit. Where does this come from? You can chow through these equations if you like, but essentially if you have a stream of wind moving along that hits a windmill, it will slow down and therefore have to spread out in order to maintain the same amount of flux. And so how slow How slow can it go? Well, if it slows down completely, then there's no longer any flow of air through the windmill and you get zero power. If it doesn't slow down at all, then you haven't taken energy from it. So there's a happy medium in there, and that maximum amount of efficiency is 59%. We have different class of winds, and this gives their wind speed. For instance, class 5 is between 6 and 6.5 meters per second, or about 15 miles an hour. However, if we take that 6 meters per second, it doesn't mean the wind's always blowing at 6 meters per second. This is a probability distribution. So yes, for a good portion of the time, we're about 6 meters per second. But there are some times when the wind blows very hard, and there are some times it doesn't blow very hard at all. This is the power that a windmill can produce, or it's the RPM for this green graph. This is increasing wind speed to the right, and this is a power in the wind that goes like velocity cubed, we remember. Well, unless there's a certain amount of power, the windmill won't turn at all. This is called the cut-in speed, and then with increasing speed, we will increase the RPM and the captured power. But at some point, the windmill doesn't spin any faster, and the rated power maxes out. This is because there's only a certain amount of current that the wires can handle in the windmill generator itself. And then at very high speeds, in order to prevent the windmill from being damaged, it cuts out, it stops, it invokes a brake. Here again you have the turbine design. It's interesting, the tip to speed ratio, the ratio of the wing tip to the speed of the wind is between 4 and 7. So this means if you have a reasonably fast wind, your tip speed is very fast. This is like 130 miles an hour, 60 meters per second. And so it's no wonder that if you get hit with one of these, it's bad for you. These super large blades, how fast do they turn in that wind? 7 times a second. That's really going. This can be very tough on the bearings. In order to get the generator spinning fast enough, we want to have a gearbox in order to gear it up. A lot of computer modeling is done to design the wings, to explore turbulence. Again, we see some strategies to overcome the challenge of how to put these things up in the air, because a third of the cost is involved in erecting them. They're big. They're really big. Here's a blade being formed, and here's the learning curve of the log of the dollars per kilowatt hour of electricity versus the log of installed capacity. And of course, as we build more, it gets cheaper. This is very interesting. Why would we have offshore wind? Well, this is where all our very windy areas are, and this is where all our people live. It would be very efficient to build wind facilities offshore where people live, and it's very windy. In fact, off the coast of Santa Barbara near the Channel Islands, there's enough wind capacity that if deployed would provide all the electrical needs for the entire state of California. But how do we bring these costs down? This is being developed for offshore. Yes, it's really big. Depending on how deep it is, you can build the offshore just like you do onshore, only in water, or actually be floating. Here's a 5 megawatt facility in the North Sea. And again, we can see that if it's offshore, it can be much bigger. They do a lot of modeling for waves and wind, what it's going to do to the turbine. And lastly, we can look at little turbines. They exist too. And I found this very amusing because this guy, Thresher, modeled everything. So they modeled your stick bird right here and the effect of it running into the windmill. And they did some satellite images, and what they found is the birds avoided the windmills. There are very few birds that run into the windmills, and it's the dumb ones they kill. So over the long run, it may make very little difference. And we can compare. What are we comparing this to? Per 1,000 megawatt wind facility per year, you have 2 deaths as opposed to the 20 to 80 from car accidents. David McKay, in his book Without Hot Air, that you can access completely on the web, shows how domestic cats dwarf even that from traffic accidents. And so you have to ask yourself, there's always going to be a payoff. Bird deaths, certainly from windmills, are going to be much, much less than the bird deaths that result from climate change due to burning of coal. There's always a cost, and depending on who you are, you get excited about one energy conversion technology or the other. Thank you.